Got the build going. That's great. So some of you who we've met with have maybe seen this before. This is the Twitter News Compass, and it's a construct that we created to represent the different ways that Twitter supports just about every breaking news event on Earth. There are the beginnings, if you can find them, of every geopolitical crisis, of which there are many going on the globe today. There are shifts in public opinion. There's such incredibly useful, rich data available for journalists. And we're going to have Dorrine talk a little bit about how they detect news using Twitter at CNN. Next on the dial, once news is detected, report. This is the active news gathering. So it's everything from verifying that the content that you see on Twitter is true via some of the signals that you can identify inside Twitter, to identifying and communicating with eyewitnesses, with sources, with experts. You can secure rights. Both as journalists and also prompting them to engage with each other around various hashtag campaigns or Q&As, polling, all kinds of things. And that kind of engagement and getting the people formerly known to the audience, thank you, Jay Rosen, for that incredible line, engaged in everything we do and carrying on and being part of the process of journalism feeds directly back, of course, to the top of the tile, because those are the people from whom breaking news is detected. So that is the Twitter News Compass. And then to start with detect, we're going to turn it over to not at assignment desk 1, but at Dorrine. Dorrine.
It was great, wasn't it? Yeah, it was amazing. One of the things that I noticed in that panel was how everyone mentioned that they had followed the news or found out about the news on Twitter, which was much the same way we started to follow that news story. And it was also curious with the MSNBC reporter who, he didn't say he didn't use Twitter, but he said he was old school, and that this really convinced him that this was a legitimate breaking news platform. And so probably everyone here already has that experience. You already know that it's good for breaking news. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit. I don't know how to work this thing. What do I do?
You
just hit this?
Yeah.
Okay. So we were one of the really early partners with Data Miner. It's a really exciting platform that we've used to help us sort out all the Twitter messages so that the most important ones about breaking news rise to the top. So I'm going to give you some very important news here with this lip gloss example. Has anyone ever heard of this Twitter user? Good. All right. a way to contact her. And although she was responding to people on her timeline, mostly defending herself and telling them that it was really true, we wound up taking the little location mark there that said LA, just assumed that it was in Los Angeles, called the LAPD. And the response that we had from the LAPD was that this incident had happened less than an hour before her tweet had gone out, and that they didn't have any information to give us because it had just happened and there was nothing that they could really release to the media yet. And it wound up being the incident where he got into an argument with someone over a cell phone, someone snapped a photo and he grabbed the phone, and so it didn't wind up being a big, huge story. He didn't go to jail. I don't think he was actually ever charged with anything. But this was one of the great examples for us of early detection, which is what we need, and probably what all of you need, to have all of these signals. Very talented and very great at playing the piano, and some people need a lot more practice. And data miner was like that for us. Once we learned how to detect breaking news with it, we had to move on to other things because news doesn't break at certain levels every day, and we wanted to get the most value we could out of it. As a 24-hour international news organization with a lot of different verticals, with a huge digital presence, with offices all over the world, we needed to know what else was out there. We knew that a domestic audience tweeting about Justin Bieber and earthquakes wasn't getting the full use out of it. So we turned to trends. I love getting this question, so I'm a figure out how trends apply to news media. There's a couple of questions that I find really helpful for me in the morning. They say that a trend is, well, they were trying to separate trends So this set of hashtags emerged shortly after the Ries situation.
that, sure, you can find Vines and Instagrams, but it's so much better to have someone there sending reports back, letting you know what they're seeing. So that's what we're going to look at. Our coverage kind of was two-part. For one, it was live. We did this using a variety of tools, including Scribble Live, Storify. Both of those kind of let us break up the general story of Fergus into a bunch of cascading news nuggets of things that were happening. One, the police have used tear gas. Two, there's a press conference, things like that. The example I show here on the bottom is actually an embedded Vine of an incredible 7 seconds of footage of a tear gas canister exploding and a photographer running away. And we did this for a week or two. We also used Twitter to point towards our reporters on the ground. Amanda, who's sitting over here, was busy getting tear gas when I was in New York spilling coffee on myself safely. And to do that, that also freed up our people on the ground to write more deep dives and scene reporting, to do things they didn't, so they didn't have to go to a press conference every 3 hours. We could do that. We could watch from New York. They could go out and talk to police. They could learn about the two divides in Ferguson, the two sides, and kind of build out our coverage into this nice 360-degree view, all of it really using Twitter as our kind of diving off point, or jumping off point. Oh, look, there it is. It's moving. Cool. So one of the main things I do, and it's really the only thing I do, is I work to identify sources that are on the ground by roaming networks. I bolded and underlined that because that's a very tweetable term that I made up a couple days ago. And I do that through lists, home, and favorites, the little buttons when you click a user on TweetDeck. To do that, you really get a good sense of what their world looks like. Home, of course, is their timeline. It's what Twitter.com looks like through their eyes. Lists is the lists they've built out to kind of follow the stories that they're following. And favorites is always fun because you get to see the things they're not retweeting, but the things they want to kind of hat tip to or support. And so a lot of what we're doing there is building out these lists on our end that then go into TweetDeck columns and are just this nonstop view of what's happening on the ground. I'm usually building out these lists. Our team's building out these lists. We use companies like Storyful to do that. They build out some awesome lists as well. But sometimes you can't do it all. Sometimes someone else does it for you. And so this is one of the main Twitter lists. I talked to Kristen Hare out there from Pointer, who did this all 4 weeks long. Journalists who were on the ground, this was a live Twitter list that she was updating in real time. That was just the best resource that I could find for Ferguson. As you can maybe see on the big screen, it has 888 subscribers, which is pretty huge, and about 100 members. So that means 888 or so people decided to use that as their primary window into Ferguson events as well. So I imagine she felt a pretty big responsibility to keep this thing alive. And I was talking to her before the panel. She talked about how it was kind of like a bonsai tree, something she was constantly trimming and pruning and building and letting it grow. And that's really kind of how you got to see Twitter list. It's not something you build and then set it and forget it. It's not like Hamburger Helper. This is something that you're growing and building and learning from constantly, and it kind of learns from you in a weird way. And there's other tools like, this is Geophedia. Geolocation is something that many people choose to include on their tweets. Geophedia is not the only tool that lets you sort through this stuff. There's even GramFeed, which is free. But basically what it does is it lets you look at a spot on the map, find all the tweets from a certain time period. This, I believe, is Saturday night, maybe between noon and midnight. If you were to look at this in the collage view, which looks like a Pinterest, it was just tear gas and people running and tweeting about that. So for us, we combine this with the tweets from the ground from verified journalists, telling us what's happening, and then we go here and we'll find the content to kind of make a nice colorful piece of report, and all that will then go into our live blog coverage as a little news item that says, hey, tear gas was just deployed at 8 o'clock, here's the corner on the street, here's a map, check it out. And it's very important, of course, to get the boots on the ground. So this is Amanda refilling a journalist of energy. No, I think she's pouring milk or Maalox into his eyes because they had both just been tear gassed. I, of course, was back in New York. I was watching on TweetDeck, and I had seen that they had just tear gassed the Quick Trip where I thought she was. So I texted tear gas at the QT, and of course she was like, I know, period. So it kind of shows you that you can't really do everything when you're sitting miles and miles away from a main news story. You got to get people close to it. And she even included the period after the I know, which is a little more of like a shut up, don't tell me I'm getting tear gas right now. Yeah, and so there's this guy who many of us might have met on Twitter at some point. Pretty friendly police officer, I'm sure was out there doing his job to keep the streets safe, but at one point, a crowd of journalists, including some live streamers, had walked by. he pointed his gun at them, said he was going to fucking kill them, and then the live streamer was like, what did you say? What's your name? And he said, I'm Officer, oh no, he said, go fuck yourself. And the guy's like, okay, officer, go fuck yourself. And that then became a hashtag, it became a whole little mini story, and so we were watching this unfold, and realized this was probably a story. We had an officer threatening a group of journalists, it was trending on Twitter, and we had the evidence we thought to kind of show that. One of the first tweets that basically chronicled, whoa, that just happened. I flagged that, took a screenshot. And then a few minutes later, a few hours later, a video clip of the live stream came out. It showed the officer on YouTube basically saying what he said, pointing the gun at the crowd, and people just freaking out about it. That was shared on Twitter. So then we have two parts of this story. Third, I went back to Amanda and I was like, hey, does this seem like a cop in Ferguson? Is this a real thing I'm looking at? It might sound dumb to her, of course, but to me, I don't know if that's something that happened in Ferguson or if it's 4 years later earlier from some other protest. She confirmed it was, and not only that, added the context that this guy had actually been harassing some journalists the night before, telling them to turn off their cameras, stay in the media zone. So he was kind of a hothead. So that led me to reach out to the St. Louis County spokesperson and say, what is this about? Are you guys aware? Is the police officer going to be disciplined? Do you have a statement? An hour later, he sent out this fantastic statement saying that not only were they aware, he was suspended indefinitely for the. Oh, okay.
Green arrow. Hi. Okay. Hi. I'm Callie Schweitzer. I work at Time. I oversee digital innovation, which basically means growth. So I'm really excited to talk about sort of the publish and distribution part of all of this. It works. Okay, so 91-year-old Time in 2014, what does that look like? We are breaking news, 24/7 operation with people in Hong Kong, London, New York, San Francisco, all around the world. So I oversee the audience engagement team, which works directly with the newsroom and everyone around the world on how do we get people reading our content. So there used to be this thing called that we like to say is think for the retweet. And basically what that means is somebody is already following us. Great, we definitely want to keep them happy and we want to make sure that they're reading our content. But how do we reach the audience who isn't following us? How do we find people who we want to be our followers? And we think about the real estate of a tweet. So I'll talk about that in tactic 2, but think about how when you're reading a newspaper, there was a study last week that said that people retain information from newspapers more than they do from online media, and it makes sense if you think about it. You open a newspaper, there's real estate there. You have a headline, you have a big photo, you have text, you have all sorts of ways that you can enter the content, and you're skimming things that you might not necessarily have thought you would be interested in because it's just all there in a package in front of you. Online, it's really different because you pick and choose, the daily me, as people say. You can choose to enter content that you want, and you can completely avoid content that you don't want. So now we're moving into a pop quiz. I know you guys probably didn't think you were going to be involved in this session, but you definitely tweets. And you might think that that's kind of counterintuitive. It was 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon. I mean, why would a tweet in the afternoon at 4:30 when people might be not at their desks, or if they are, not on Twitter, very hard to believe, right? Do better than something in the morning that was very straightforward. And, oh no, I think there was a summary there, but the answer to that is really that the second tweet gave you information that you didn't already know. So the first one was very much just a kind of call to action. Read this story about September 11th, Nancy Gibbs' cover story from 2001, 2 days after September 11th. And the second one gave you information that empowered you. I mean, you thought, wow, the time red border, something that is iconic, that is incredibly classic, it has only changed colors 3 times in Time's history. That's amazing. So that is something that it changes the way that you think about something, while at the same time intriguing you to click and to experience that. So the second tactic is making it visual. So Time is incredibly well known for its photography, and that's something that we really try to feature in our And it was really interesting for us to see how did the different tweets compare when we posted it in the morning, when we posted it in the afternoon, when we posted it over the weekend. What were people engaging with on the tweet specifically? Tactic 3, distribution partnerships. So this is really where the public updated in real time. So we had this great visual presentation, and we were really excited to see how far could we make one tweet go. Here, Andrew Fitzgerald announces it on the Twitter blog with some amplification from Twitter. And this tweet about the Pope becoming the person of the year ended up becoming our most retweeted tweet in Time history. I think 17,000 something tweets. I can't see that. But it was really such an amazing example of something that reached an audience far beyond what we were used to. It's to this date, still our most retweeted tweet in Time history.
And sound more like America. And it's also to tell stories about people of color, but, you know, for them. And so, forgot about this. We engage people in a variety of different ways. We'll do the Twitter chats that a lot of other places do really well. We'll ask questions like, what's a question about your race that people have asked you? Gene Demby, a blogger, the lead blogger actually with Code Switch, he recently engaged in a long conversation about corporal punishment and spanking. I mean, is it child abuse? Things like that. And we've also done things where we've had poets come curate a poem during National Poetry Month. But I'm going to focus on two specific projects that we've done that I think used Twitter in a really, what I think is a unique way to get our audience engaged even more and kind of strengthen the community that we have, which is people of color. So when you think about historical reenactments, what do you think about? You probably think about going to middle school, to Sturbridge Village if you're from Massachusetts or something like that, and seeing people dress up and, you know, funny costumes. But Twitter is a really great way to reimagine history. And I think we were having a conversation, was it you, Mark Lucky, who brought this up to us, who flagged this? Historical reenactments on Twitter are really, really interesting. Like, look at Titanic real time. It's a product of, I think, the History Press. And what this person did was decide to live tweet the sinking of the Titanic as if it was happening in modern day. And you have another one, Real-Time World War II, which I think is the product of a grad student who might be procrastinating on their thesis. It sounds like a really good way to spend your time. But we knew that we wanted to cover the summer of 1963, which is a pivotal summer in the civil rights movement when a lot of different riots and protests started happening. Toward the end of it, we knew would be when the March on Washington happened in August. And we decided to create this project that you might have heard about called Today 1963. And the engagement part of this is basically that we were inviting and asking people to sit with us for a long, long moment, probably half a year, and pretend that Twitter existed in '63? How would the news unfold? You saw Real-Time Titanic and the World War II projects. They were kind of coming at the idea of retelling history in a way that was just retelling it, but we wanted to pretend that a news organization was live tweeting in the '60s. And so how we did this was through, first, a lot of different research. And I'm going to focus on November 22nd, 1963, which was when President Kennedy was assassinated. For this day alone, we had assembled about 150 different tweets that would go out that would really share the texture of the day and the moments, as if we were experiencing them now. Because when we think about, this project aside, when we think about what happened 50 years ago from that day, it's easy to read the historical reports. It's easy to, read the article story that will basically say, oh yes, this happened. But to put yourself in that mindset was a way that we wanted to challenge our readers and consumers of Twitter. And the Google Doc spreadsheet on the right is kind of a showcase of how we combed through different radio archives, CBS radio, I believe, ABC radio maybe, and found this information. And another project that I want to talk about is XCultureLove, which was a hashtag we created with the idea of having a month-long conversation, mostly on Twitter, that would focus on dating, interracial dating. And we did this throughout the whole month of February because we wanted to experiment. So to backtrack, this XCultureLove group, we had a group of 30 or so super users who we invited to participate using a Google form. And we put it on Twitter, and we were looking for people who had ideas about interracial dating, whether or not they participated, whether or not they did, or didn't, I should say. And so we had about 200 people asked to participate. They answered all these questions about themselves, like, yes, I'm in an interracial relationship. No, I only date Jewish people. No, I don't date white men. Things like this. Because one of the aims of what Code Switch does is we try to have really tricky, uncomfortable conversations in public ways on Twitter. We try to tease these things out so when you're reading these tweets, you can kind of feel, I have a home here too. And people are listening, and we're telling those different stories. So we had people fill out, this job form, and we then narrowed it down to the 30 people I mentioned before, which represented people of different sexual orientations all across the country, different ages, different experiences with interracial dating. And we knew that we were going to bring this to Twitter, and I will get to that. But we also gave these people homework, and we wanted to engage with them every single week, where we knew that we were going to have a Twitter chat every week about a different theme. So it was going to be about fetishes versus preferences. Do any of you guys normally tweet about fetishes and preferences in your day-to-day? Guessing from the silence that that's probably a no. But these are the types of themes that we were going to ask people to be tweeting about. And to kind of get a more robust conversation, what we did was, first, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can kind of see we had sort of like a thread going where we were in touch with these 30 people, asking them to share their personal experiences. And then on the right, we fed them into a document where we asked them to share questions with us that they wanted to use on Twitter, that we should ask in our official Twitter chat of the week. And what we were doing was we were creating a private space with these 30 super users that we were then going to open up to the public, all of our Twitter followers, all of NPR's Twitter followers, the people who just happened upon us. And this is an early screenshot of what happened. This was one of our first Twitter chats about, how have your racial, cultural preferences affected your dating life, either as a preferee or the preferred? And these are uncomfortable topics. So I think it was really remarkable hearing the response, because these are questions that, people, as we discovered two minutes ago, that not many people get asked or want to talk about on Twitter. And then we would recap it and have more conversations about it, where we would follow up with people after and ask them to share stories in greater depth. And basically, to sum that all up, the way we try and use Twitter and social media is to engage people in these sorts of conversations and listen, and then take that to our reporting both online and on air.
That's great. Thank you so much. These are such
illegal to do this kind of social media instant replay for goals. You kind of saw it. There'd be a goal. It would erupt on Twitter. The ball would be reset. They'd go kick it away. You know, soccer terms that I don't know. But the World Cup vines that were out there, and there were a lot of them, would start sharing out these instant replays. And those things shared like crazy. And I thought that was such a really neat way to see kind of this instant replay on Twitter. I believe SB Nation was doing it pretty well, right? And then I do know that ESPN probably wasn't too happy about that. So that is a challenge that we need to figure out as an industry, is how to allow, you know, instant replay in sports to get on social media, on Vine and Twitter. I'm sure someone will do it and they'll make a lot of money. But that would be my vote.
Yeah, cool.
I looked up to them.
And I'll say this just really quickly. In general, I really love how the different bloggers, reporters at BuzzFeed all interact with each other on Twitter, where it seems like there's always that push. And I don't know if it's concerted or just natural because they're all so webby, but they're always tweeting each other's articles around the same times, it seems, from what I've noticed, and just talking to each other about them. And that makes their stories just obviously go more viral, but seem that much more interesting.
Who else do we like?
The New York Times just announced their watching ticker on the homepage, and I'm just really interested in general in sort of the integration of tickers and various sort of breaking news wires into both homepages and article pages, specifically because, you know, that large motto of the homepage is dead. I'm just really interested in seeing how users engage with that and whether it's something that's really effective.
Great. Dorrine, you got anything? No, okay. All right, good. We will then open it up to questions from the audience for any of our panelists. Yes, I don't know, do we have mics going around, or we just have to shout? If you
traffic to our website via social media, specifically Twitter. But I wanted to hear what you guys thought about Twitter clickbait. You won't believe what the answer is to this, or wait till you see. You know, we're all trying to get more retweets and visits to our site, but like, what do we owe our readers to not lead them on in that way? Like, what? I don't know if you guys have any sort of like guidelines.
Yeah. So I'm just going to briefly recap the question for the live feed. So the question was from an editor at another news organization, presumably unidentified, that what the feeling of the panelists around what you described as clickbait, where you won't believe what you've seen, those kinds of things that are meant to attract clicks, and what kind of responsibility do we owe it to our readers and our audience in that regard. So anyone wants to take that?
We're doing this for them. So I think that while there's certainly an appeal to engaging the audience and bringing the audience in a intriguing way, I think that we owe our readers more than that, and by being on Twitter, we're interjecting ourselves into their lives. Yes, they choose to follow us, but it's something that we want to make it worth their while. And I think that there's nothing worse than the ick factor of, I was actually just using this example earlier of an article I read where it was something like, you'll never believe how Channing Tatum got his abs. And you clicked it and it was like, sit-ups. And I just was like, seriously? And I just think everything we can do to avoid that is encouraged.
Yeah, I think the popularity of accounts like Saved You a Click really speak to how annoying those types of posts are.
Yeah.
What's that?
Saved You a Click.
Yeah.
It will give you the answer.
That's an account, yeah.
And then the
Saved
tweet.
You a click, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, at Saved You a Click.
Saved You a click.
Shh, don't tell me.
Okay, there are mics you said there's mics in the aisles, right? I don't see them. Does anybody see them? They're right. Oh, there you are. Okay, hello. Yeah, sorry. There's only one over there.
And there's one over there.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm blind.
Okay, thanks. My name is Courtney Radge. I'm with the Committee to Protect Journalists. And unlike maybe some of the news organizations, but what we want to do is be part of the stories and put the press freedom dimension in stories that are out there that should be including that factor. For example, when the Egyptian president's having a meeting with Obama, we want the fact that there are imprisoned journalists there to be mentioned. So do you have any suggestions of how, say, more advocacy or smaller news organizations that aren't, big groups like Time, don't have those very popular articles, can get, say, the vegetables of news, the broccoli of news, into the cycle?
We found that it's important to engage with that community, just like Kat was talking about. Her group goes to way more lengths to engage and cultivate a community than probably we have ever done. And that pays off. People will eat their vegetables, even on Twitter, if you give them good reason to, and they know that you're giving them something of value, something that they want to know, they've signed up for it. If they're interested in that, they'll need to know it, and they'll come to you and they'll trust you. But if you throw it out there to the masses, expecting them, the One Directioners and the Beliebers to click on it, they're not going to. You just have to know who your audience is, target them, talk to them, cultivate them, make them feel important.
Yeah, I would say that for a smaller news organization, because that's kind of how Code Switch feels within NPR. We're a team of 6 or so people working directly on us, and we're part of a slightly bigger unit. That it does come down to engagement, because I think that's where we really do well in that space. But also, just little things that Callie talks about also, where you want to share your stories in multiple ways throughout the different times of day. Where you can kind of get a lot of stretch depending on who's looking at your tweets during what time. So even just simple things like that can go far.
I think it's also about activating those who are interested in the story. Every story has a community who cares. So even if you have a broccoli blog, literally a vegetable blog, there's probably people out there that care a lot about broccoli. You're going to have Big Broccoli. You're going to have, my mom would probably follow it. You're going to have people that really want to stay up on those things, and there's probably a subreddit, our broccoli. And on a very tactical level, one thing you can do is in TweetDeck, again, create a column that you've created a list of all these influencers, and you want to say, once a week, I want to make sure these guys are tweeting my stories about broccoli. And that kind of goes into something we talked on email a little bit about, which I don't know if I'm stealing your comment, but how in the New York Times Innovation Report, they had mentioned how they wanted to go after Ashton Kutcher for his sex trafficking story, which breaks my heart in a weird way, because I don't want the New York Times to say, we got to get the story to Ashton Kutcher to get traffic. But at the same time, it is important that you identify your influencers and make sure that they're not only reading your content, but sharing it.
I also think about things on a person-by-person basis. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily about each piece needs to be the most retweeted or the most this or the most that. I dispelled the notion that people don't want to read hard news. Some of Time's most trafficked pieces are the hardest of hard news. And I think that exactly like everyone has said about engaging the community, if you even think about things on a one-person basis, like Brian said, with reaching out to one person, you're affecting so many people that you don't even know about.
Great, thank you. I do see the mic over there, but
Yes.
I can't see the person.
This is a question for Callie.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Oh, my name is Teresa Frontado. I'm Director of Social Media for News at Univision. And my question is, you mentioned in your presentation to use the 140 characters to show and tell. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Because actually what I make my team do is always leave a little bit less space. So we have space for people to retweet, to comment, and put their own kind of spin on what we're doing.
Yes, we definitely do that. So I think that's a great point. We oftentimes leave a lot of space for people to add their own thoughts and things because I think that's a great way for people to engage with your content. But we're definitely not against going for the full 140 characters if we think that we have the content that really merits it, whether it's a photo or a video or a GIF or anything.
It also feels to me like Twitter, and I'm not trying to speak for you guys, but it's going away from the quote retweet model and more for the retweet with a comment beneath it. As I've seen, now that you see actually threads on Twitter between people talking about a piece of content, it kind of removes the need to have the quote where you put little commentary in front of the RT and then in front of the content.
Good. Okay, over here.
Hi there. I'm Jared. I'm from Upstatement in Boston. We're a web publication design firm. My question is actually for Kat about the interracial dating campaign that you did on social media. Mm-hmm. What type of manpower does it take you or your team to do that? Is that just you? Is that you and 3 other people? Is that a week
yeah, it was mostly me. It was a project that I did throughout the month of February, and I think I might have had an intern help with it. But it did take a lot of planning and organization, but actually not too much manpower, if you think about it. I mean, we just came in with 3 or 4 different themes that we knew we wanted to hit, because these are things that people have always just wanted to talk about in our stories, where we would write a story about fetishes, and you'd look at the comments thread of the story, and you'd have all those themes there anyway. So we thought, okay, why not do something on dating? And it was easy to get the ideas together, but it took organization, though.
Question on this side.
Hi, I'm Tori from Yahoo Canada News. This is actually for Kat as well. When you were doing your the project, did you find that you had a time where you put out a call for engagement or a call to action and you didn't get the response you wanted, and how did you kind of address that?
Oh yeah, totally. We do a lot of call outs, and sometimes they fall flat, but that's okay. I mean, maybe people aren't at their computers that time of day. Maybe we didn't phrase the question in a way that really pulled in people to want to respond. When I think about how I form questions on Twitter, don't ask a yes or no question, because then people aren't really going to answer it. They'll just say yes or no, and then you'll think, wow, I'm not really able to retweet that because no one else is going to understand the context. But when that happens, we try again later that day or the next week, and especially if it's something that doesn't really quite have that news peg, because it's something about experiences.
This side.
I'm Celia Gorman, IEEE Spectrum. My question is about engagement on the other side, internally. Most of our editors have a sort of print-only attitude, and we're working to try to get them engaged, to get them to engage. And, it's hard. How do you inspire, your other editors to be involved in Twitter and to promote and to, engage with their readers?
That's a good one. Go for it, Callie.
I think you show them the possibility for conversation around the topics that they're passionate in. This is a super simple recommendation, but maybe make a list of suggested people who they should follow and have them engaging with them, or set up some kind of a tweet schedule where maybe they try to tweet once a week or something. I know it sounds really primitive, but I think that onboarding someone to a platform like Twitter can be kind of intimidating if they're not used to it. And so I would try something like that, and I would just show them that if you do some kind of a question or a call to action or something, that they can get really engaged and thoughtful responses, and it's a whole new way of interacting with their audience that they would probably really welcome. I think it's just about teaching people what they don't know.
Yeah, and I will say at NPR, it's a radio dominant organization that does digital also pretty well. And Melody Kramer started about a year and a half ago, although she's been working with NPR before. But what she did was she created this email listserv within the building called Social Sandbox, which she's then now turned into a Tumblr called, I think it's socialsandbox.tumblr.com, and it's really great. But there she shares different links to ways that social media has worked really well, different tools that people have shared, and she'll give a hat tip or a shout out to the reporter or person who sent and like tipped her off to the article in the first place. And that's helping create a more open culture within NPR from what I've noticed and what I've observed. And it makes people more willing to experiment with these things that they might not be comfortable with. So something as simple as a newsletter that goes out to a lot of people every single day within your organization can do a lot.
Thank you. Those are great answers. I'm afraid we're at the end of the hour. But I just want to say, on behalf of Twitter, as much as we go out and we talk to partners and we try to help our partners in the news industry use Twitter in so many ways, we learned so much by hearing what you guys are doing. So I could just listen to you tell your stories that we can then spread around all day. So thank you so much. Thank you for the great questions to the audience. And we'll see you later. Thank you.
I've been waiting just to tell you something I could never ever say. It's the answer we've been looking for all along the way. It's the simplest thing, like a bell went ding in my head. What it said was, it will all be okay. You just gotta live the day, 'cause tomorrow is a nice dream away. Just a moment, then it fades. Live the day, 'cause tomorrow is a nice dream away. Just a moment. In a world that's undeniable, undefinable, unreliable, I'm an outcast in my own mind, driven blind by my desire. But to reach higher, I divide myself in half and half again. I swear that there'll be nothing left of me when I reach the end. 'Cause it's the simplest thing, like a chime when ringing my head.